how can I actually include story in my writing?
Everyone knows storytelling is important. And if you scroll on Instagram or come across any copywriter or even marketer, they'll tell you, tell your story. There are 3 different types of stories I like to focus on, which is the story you tell yourself as the business owner, as the brand, stories that your customers believe about themselves, and then the stories that bridge the 2 together. The more you can make it about the person who is reading it, the better. But stories help us bridge that gap. It's why it's so entertaining to binge Stranger Things. The human emotion is there. It's not just about a story about aliens. There's fear, excitement, adventure, and that is what we crave.
Yay, I'm so excited for today's episode because I have the one and only Claire Yo. Now, here is a secret. She is my copywriting superpower. She is our marketing manager overseeing all of our content, and I'm so thrilled to have her join us today. Yay!
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, when we were talking about the theme for this episode, so many things came up, right? Marketing, copywriting, really big topics. But the one thing that I really wanted to touch on was copywriting and marketing in the age of AI. We've all seen those memes. You can use Chat GPT to create 30 days of content, right? So I just want to start with that question first is, what is your overall view of AI and how it's going to change marketing and PR and writing and social media?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question, right? It is kind of the $1 million question right now. And I really believe that AI is a tool, not a takeover. So this is the point where you're differentiating yourself from everyone else in the game. Because think about it this way, ChatGPT is so easily available and it saves you so much time. You can literally input anything, a prompt, and it'll generate what you ask it for, right? So in the age of content and content being digital currency, you can literally print money with ChatGPT. However, you're printing monopoly money. You're not printing real value money because if everyone can print it, the value just depreciates, right? If it's so easy to just turn out 30 pieces of content in 5 minutes, why wouldn't anyone do it? So I, as a copywriter, do use ChatGPT, just putting that out there, but it is never the end product. So I would never ever copy and paste something that ChatGPT produces and let that be the final thing and the final touch point between my words and my audience. What I do use it for is to help me understand my audience better. So I'll feed it prompts like, can you dive into a deep pain point of my audience? And I'll be very specific about it, right? Like for the mom who is in her 40s, she's very, very tired. She has 3 kids. What is her biggest concern right now? And how can I speak to that? So that is how I would use AI in my copywriting. But it is a hot button topic. And I've seen a lot of terrible content produced by AI and people are just copy pasting it simply into the captions. And that's just not the way to go about it. So human empathy and compassion is still at the heart of marketing. And if you're missing that mark by letting AI do it all for you, your business will suffer in the long run.
Yeah, I love that you said not to be like everyone else, because that's really the point of marketing. And I think as much as we want to automate and systematize, the more your marketing sounds like someone else's, the more it kind of loses its power, right? Isn't that the whole point of marketing, is to differentiate yourself?
Yeah. So a lot of people feel very overwhelmed in business. They think, how am I going to stand out from the crowd? Is it already oversaturated? To that, my answer is just walk through any grocery store. You don't have one option of water. You don't have one option of toilet paper. You have hundreds, if not thousands. And think about it on a global scale. You have even more. So what marketing really is not how you can best push your product, because everyone has toilet paper, everyone has water. If we're lucky, right, and privileged to have bottled water. But it's about how you're different. And that comes with personality, that comes with mission, that comes with story behind why you're doing what you're doing, right? So how you have Dasani, for instance, is very different from how you perceive Smart Water or Fiji. And that essence at its core is your brand personality coming out, and marketing is there to help you communicate that, not just sell water.
Yeah. And I love, and for all the people listening, I'm going to let you in a little scoop. So Claire was a concert pianist. She actually played like at Carnegie Hall, y'all. She's a big deal. So I love what you said about capturing your audience because you know all about that, right? People pay to see you play and not just listen to an album. And the fact that concerts are selling out shows that people still want that connection. So my next question is, how can you tell, because you've seen all the copy, the good copy, the bad copy, how can you tell what is something that is AI produced and trying to be empathetic and what is actually like human written?
Yeah, so this is a very great question. And my mark is always the human experience, right? You can tell when AI is telling you a story because it just feels like it's a shell. It's lacking something, that oomph behind it, versus when you're hearing a story from a friend who is communicating it through very real human experiences. So this is something that I like to tell, like compare between showing versus telling, right? Showing is placing mental movies in my head. What were you feeling? What was the scent like? What was the sensation on your skin, right? So whenever you're writing something, I would take it from that angle. What is the real emotions behind it, and how do humans perceive these things? Versus what is the benefit of what you do? Because that is what AI is going to generate from you. Why do you need water? It hydrates you. It's important. You're made out of like 70% water, right? But for humans, it's like, well, I had this experience of drinking Arrowhead water and it tasted funny and it like just wasn't it. And I hated drinking water. So I put powders in there to like change the taste and so on and so forth. So you can see two very different types of story coming through. One just tells you what water does. The other shows you the experience of drinking bad water, which is a very human thing.
Yeah, I love that you said story, and obviously you're the founder of the Story Social. That's your copywriting agency. I want to talk about story because there's so many angles. We've had Jude Charles, who's a master storyteller, talk about story. He takes it from a documentary film point of view. I want to talk about story as it relates to copywriting and marketing. Can you give maybe an example or some tips on how our audience can use story? Because there's so many like TED Talks on it,
Yeah,
but I want to hear it like really digestible, actionable. Like how can I actually include story in my writing?
absolutely. So there's this misconception, or I should start it this way. Everyone knows storytelling is important. And if you scroll on Instagram or come across any copywriter or even marketer, they'll tell you, tell your story, tell your story. But how do you know which stories are relevant to the person who needs to hear it, right? So there are three different types of stories I like to focus on, which is the story you tell yourself as the business owner, as the brand, the stories that your customers believe about themselves as it pertains to your product or your service or the transformation that you're providing. And then the stories that bridge the two together. So when you're mining for stories, you always want to get it back to that deeper why you're doing what you're doing. What problems do you solve or your service or your product solve? And what is it that your audience is struggling with? What do they believe about your product? Or if it's ice cream, for instance, right? What do they think about ice cream? What do they look for in ice cream? Like, what is their ideal world when it comes to like consuming ice cream? Like, what is that moment where they really, really, really crave ice cream? And how can we tell that story between why we started the brand? And is it because you're looking for dairy, gluten-free options that are healthy and guilt-free, right? So those stories that we tell have to connect to all those points. And I'm not saying that all your stories have to be about ice cream. They can be about anything, about craving something that is not offered in the market, craving something by a founder who gets your specific struggles. It could be about taste. Whatever it is, it needs to tie to that deeper point beyond ice cream. Again, like the water example.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to story, right? So there's people who approach marketing of like benefits, 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 but you're saying yes, do the benefits, but start with the story and use the story as an avenue to talk about the benefits. And the way you bring in story is by presenting them with a moment in time. Is that kind of a good way to think about it?
Yeah, that is a great way to think about it because benefits are great. We love a good benefit, right? But what really makes it juicy is when we can see the benefit playing out in our own lives. Because think about it this way, you will never ever catch your audience exactly when you want them to, right? Especially on social media, especially with like TikTok, where things are so fast. They're scrolling mindlessly. They're not thinking about your product or your service. But when you place and angle your product or service in a very real experience, a moment in time, that's the click. They can feel that already, and that will make them pause and go, yeah, I've definitely experienced this. I want to hear more.
Can you give me another example? Let's just talk about, let's say, the most common thing that maybe our audience is dealing with when it comes to marketing, which is content creation. So let's say an Instagram post, right? The caption. Can you give me an example of a caption that is purely just very kind of cookie cutter benefits and something that actually uses a moment in time, which is story, to then lead people into the benefits? And that's what I love
Yeah.
about story, because you're selling, but you're not really selling. So give me an example. I mean, it could be any product. Like, I'll let you choose.
Yeah. So let's just go with, productivity, right? Everyone wants to increase productivity. It's something that the whole world is craving. Get more done in less time. Sign me up, right? So I can start the caption or any body of copy with, here are 5 hacks to increase your productivity. But that needs to depend on that person scrolling or reading that, needing or looking for those productivity tips at that moment. And it also needs to depend on whether they feel like absorbing that productivity hack or tip at that moment, right? But if I were to say, I struggled with getting stuff done, I would feel so busy all day. And when I look at my calendar, I actually got nothing done in that day. But why do I feel like I've just worked 48 hours nonstop? That is more of an interesting feeling. And it's something that anyone looking for productivity tips have experienced before. So angling it in that moment of time of frustration of like, why do I feel so busy and still I'm getting nothing done? Then leading it to, well, these are the tips that actually help me combat that. These are the tips that solve it. Suddenly I'm more interested now because I see the problem. I feel the problem. I'm not just thinking, here's the solution, and it's not tied to anything I'm interested in right now.
Got it. So do you think the common faux pas is people just go straight into the solution? Like tips for productivity, one, two, three, instead of backtracking it and putting it in a moment in time. I remember I was up all night for an important interview and I hate the way I felt before I walked into that room. And then boom, go into the tips.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always whenever you write something, the more you can make it about the person who is reading it, the better. And it's easier said than done. It's easier for me to come on and be like, "Oh, your about shouldn't be about you. It should be about your audience," right? But stories help us bridge that gap. It's why we have movies and why it's so entertaining to like binge Stranger Things. Like that is such an unreal experience, but the human emotion is there, right? Like it's not just about a story about aliens. There's fear, there's excitement, there's adventure, and that is what we crave. So that's what you do when you backtrack it from the solution you provide to why you're providing that solution. What was the experience between the solution you're providing and why this exists as an option for them?
So instead of maybe thinking of it as write a story for someone else, because we don't know that someone else, maybe it's just to write about these shared emotions that we all feel, right? Fear, unworthiness, unattractive,
Mhm.
whatever that is. I mean, do you think that's a great baseline to start? Is like write down all of the common emotions that we feel
Yeah.
and then kind of start our story from there? Do you have a framework on how someone can do that and then maybe repurpose it for any kind of writing, whether it's captions or show notes or a blog?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, you hit it right on the head. It is bringing it down to that core emotion. But something that would help you really identify that is, where were you 3 years ago? Where were you 5 years ago? Right? Because every founder has that story, that breakthrough where it's like, this needs to be a solution that is offered in the marketplace. So take us a couple years back to that point when you were really desperately looking to solve something, right? You felt a lot. It's why you work so hard to get where you are today. And it's easier for us right now, or for me to sit right here and tell you that. But when we're writing, we already assume that, they know this. This is entry level stuff, but you just never know what someone needs to hear at this point of time. There is always someone who was you a couple years back.
I love it. Do you have like a matrix or an Excel spreadsheet where we can actually get off of this episode and start to put in the framework of how to write captions, not using ChatGPT, but using our brain, using our emotions, using our story?
I use a content matrix that I actually got from Alex Catoni, who is the founder of the Copy Posse. And it's her framework. It is brilliant. It basically breaks your content down into 5 main pillars. And within each pillar, you break that down into sub pillars and you find an angle for each. So there is a world category where it's like, how can we tie this topic we're talking to something that's relevant in the world today? There is a human experience angle where it's how do we tie what we're talking about to the deep fears, desires, and the human experience. So it is a whole matrix that's built out. It's very simple, but it's 5 by 5 and there's a lot going on there. And it's her product, so it's not up to me to share, but I highly recommend checking that out if you're interested.
Yes, but definitely start with the emotion instead of the benefits.
Mhm.
Any other tips for people who are looking at their content and thinking, I just don't know what to write? How can you get them started?
That's the $1 million question. Everyone sits down, gets into analysis paralysis, and they don't know where to start. So I would just say, write something. Whatever it is, it doesn't even have to be about your topic. What are you feeling right now, right? Like if you're having writer's block, write about that. Dive into that frustration and that emotion and somehow find a way to stew in that and tie that frustration or whatever you're feeling in that moment to your product. Every service, every solution, every product out there solves a frustration or something similar to that, right? It provides an extra benefit, but what's that emotion behind that? So when you're sitting down and when you're stuck, just write once the words flow out, and don't even think about like having perfect writing. And that's not what this is about. It's just getting in the habit of talking, getting in the habit of expressing, and just getting in that flow. So that's my biggest advice for anyone who struggles with writing anything.
Yeah, and one of the things that we started to do, Claire, since we started working together, is we have a Google Doc, like a running Google Doc. And every time I notice something, and this is a skill, right? Like PR, which we will get into, but I really believe that this is not something that you can delegate. As CEOs, we are the writers, we are the best salespeople. We know what our audience wants, and we're best to communicate that. So we need to get in the habit of knowing how to use story. So here's how me and Claire do it. I'll be at the gym. A lot of times when I'm exercising or moving my body, that's when I get my best ideas, right? It'll be something completely unrelated, like me doing a kick and then spraining my ankle. And that becomes an Instagram post because that takes me back and the readers back to a moment in time where I tried to do something and failed, right? Or I learned something. Or I'll be eating noodles, right? And then like I saw a woman who was like doing something strange, and then I'll put that into the Google Doc, and then that will become the beginning 2 sentences of another Instagram post. So think about in your daily life, for anyone that's listening, how can you use very simple tools that we all have, whether it's like the audio note app, where you're just like biking, or if you're just like me, you get ideas and flow. Record something that you see, some interesting person you saw in Central Park, and use that as a way to start your story. And now we have like a running matrix. We got like 20 or 30 different moments in time now that Claire uses. So that's another tip for you. Now that we talked
Yeah,
about all this,
that's a great one.
yeah, all the things, we gave a lot of tips. What are some don'ts? Because one way that people can get started is knowing what not to do. So what are some common things that people should just not do and avoid when it comes to like story and marketing?
Don't try so hard. Don't try so hard to find your story. Like you said, that running Google Doc of daily things, once you start getting in the habit of compiling that, you won't have to find your story when you sit down to actually produce content. First of all, when we sit down to produce content, we're so motivated by like the external forces, right? Like, will this get seen? Will this get likes? What will they think? But when we're just jotting down stories as if we're writing to a friend, when you send a voice memo to a friend, you don't think about whether your friend will enjoy it. You just automatically dive into it. And 10 out of 10 times, your friend's probably listening to your voice memo as like a podcast. So this is the same feeling we want to create when we approach our content. We want our audience to feel like, ooh, this is good. This is juicy. This is so bingeable. This is like a friend telling me about her day. And then that's how you can like very, very eloquently segue into your promise or your offer. But it starts with that human connection first. So don't overthink your stories. just dive into it, brain dump it first, brain dump it. And then later on, when you sit down to create content, look at your brain dump, go through it and read through what you wrote and try to identify the core emotion behind the story you're telling. And that's how you're going to create that link between a seemingly irrelevant story and what you're trying to convey to your audience.
I love it. Now we've kind of walked our audience through kind of the basics of good marketing, which is starting with a story, which is a moment in time. We gave them actual tips on how to put that into a matrix, whether it's using a notes app or on the go, so they can get those little tidbits. How can you measure if your content or storytelling is actually working?
When someone goes, I get this, I felt this, it feels like my therapist wrote this, it feels like, how do you know these intimate details of my life, right? But you're not even calling them out on those things. You're using your own experiences because you're attracting your target audience. You're not attracting anyone else. So if they are your target audience, there are common links already there. So if someone's commenting you saying, hey, thank you so much for sharing the story, it really made me feel seen, that's a huge win. If they're DMing you, telling you the same thing and starting that conversation, that's a huge win.
And I do get those DMs, and it's so important because that's really what my business is about, is making people feel seen through them pitching themselves and seeing ourselves represented in media. And that leads me to my next question is marketing, PR, copywriting, pitching. They seem like different things, but you told me before we got on here that they're actually fundamentals that kind of layer on top of each other. So can you tell me, for you as someone who's a marketer, what have you learned from working with me, someone who writes pitches for PR? What is the interconnection between that?
That's such a great question. So I obviously love writing. I understand that that is my job. That is what I do. That's why I got into it. I love writing. So that's why I do what I do. However, as business owners, you're not getting in to write, but you have to write because it's communication, right? And you have to communicate what in everyday life, never mind as a business owner, as a human being. And if you already feel like writing is a chore, you're not going to do a good job at it. So where it intersects with PR, and it intersects in a lot of ways, but this is the most important one in my opinion, because I've seen so many entrepreneurs, so many business owners get so burnt out by the writing process. And for them to write 30 captions every month, emails, sales pages, product descriptions, that's a whole lot of writing. And if you're not liking it, you're going to be set up for the failure, or you're not going to enjoy the process and you're going to burn out. So PR is where you can really hone in on one area of writing, which is strengthening your pitch. Then you leave the rest to someone whose job is to write, the journalist, right? And they're a good writer. They're fantastic. This is what they do. So if you can strengthen the pitch, you've multiplied your content. You've multiplied the ways that you can convey something in a very persuasive and compelling manner. So if you struggle with writing, if you don't like writing, I highly recommend just focusing on writing a good pitch. The rest will take care of itself.
Ooh, say it again. I think we need to put it on all of our GCPR merch. We need to change all of our taglines, because I always talk about leveraging time as CEOs. And the more our business grows, it's a reflection of how we can leverage our time. So I will always say this: I would rather get a piece of organic, like earned media, which is getting on a podcast, and use that and repurpose that into 10 small little Instagram pieces or reels than go at it the other way around. You're never going to see me start writing something or a reel or do something that's not already taken from a bigger piece of content. And so that's what I mean by really leveraging your content. So I'm always going to start at the PR, the bigger piece, and then kind of repurpose that. And that's kind of what you help me do as well. But again, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? So a lot of people are still doing the work that doesn't really get them so far, which is like nitpicking and trying to perfect that one reel that maybe will get a reach for 24 hours. So I'm not saying that there's no room for social media, right? Social media is great, but think about all the different buckets of marketing that you do, and PR is in there. To me, I think if you can master PR, everything, like you said, takes care of itself. It really is the foundation of all of your other communication. Is there anything else you want people to know when it comes to AI and all the tools? Because it seems like every single day we're being hit with a tool or a shortcut or a hack, and I'm all about saving time. So how do we know, like, when to actually go down that pathway of like, let's use this time-saving marketing device versus something that's just wasting our time. Because there is a case to be said that maybe we can use Chat GPT and just give it better and better and better prompts for it to learn the emotion of what we're talking about. Or do you not agree? Maybe there is no replacement for that.
I do agree with you. I also, as someone who uses Chat GPT in the research process, since it's becoming, there's a lot of users right now, right? So what you feed the machine really does affect the output, and it's sourcing from all these users now. So I do find myself seeing that the answers that Chat GPT is giving me aren't as good as they used to because volume is high. It's learning so much more. So I do believe there is a way to use it wisely, and it always comes down to the human, right? It's artificial intelligence with human intelligence makes that incredible product. So I love to use it and couple that with my human brain and practicing what I would respond to. Like if I were to read this output by ChatGPT, how would I feel as a human, right? And then tweaking whatever it is that you read and your feelings for that person and to combat those fears and questions that you have about the output. That's going to be the best way to use it right now. I would never ever copy paste the final product. That's a no-go. That's how you get lost in the sea of same.
Yeah. Let's talk about the actual ways that we can use ChatGPT. Obviously, like, there's certain things you can use it and not. So do you use it for show notes, blogs, captions? Like, where does it start and end?
I use it for keywords. Use it for show notes. In terms of that, I would say, what are some keywords that I could use for this type of episode? Or if it's a blog post, I'm writing a blog post about X topic. What are some keywords that would rank right now? So that's how it generates those keywords for me. Of course, exercising your own caution and what works with what you're writing. And that saves you so much time already, right? So that's a great way to use it and streamline the research process.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay. We talked about so many things: AI, marketing, the irreplaceable parts of marketing, how marketing is a story and story is a moment in time, and why PR is the fundamental of all of these things. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience about as you see this landscape evolve? I think one thing that I would love to know is, it seems like we're so saturated with content, right? Everyone knows the hook formula, the cliffhanger. And it honestly, even that is being tired. So in an age
Yeah.
when everyone is trying to catch your attention and do some kind of gimmick, how do you actually stand out? How do you actually capture someone's attention?
My answer, depending on who's hearing it, will feel very satisfying or unsatisfactory. And it's be you, be yourself. Because there are a million billion people doing business every single day, and a lot also within your industry solving the same problems that you do. But there's only one you, one of your specific set of experiences, and that's what's going to make you stand out no matter what. And in this age where content is so easily accessible, it's no longer gold. Content is no longer king. Good content is, but content in general isn't. So this is where I also love PR and gaining that visibility through landing a feature in a major publication. Because if we're always relying on content, we're relying on the habits of scrollers, and everyone knows themselves when we scroll through social media, we're scrolling and we're scrolling fast. We see something for like not even a second and we go to the next thing. But when someone picks up a magazine or someone goes to a website to read something, they're looking, they're actively searching. Whereas you're trying to capture attention that hopefully you could capture depending on how fast someone's scrolling and if they're looking for it. But when you pitch yourself for these outlets, people are actively ready to consume versus mindlessly scrolling away.
Exactly. That is the energy that I want to bring to everything, where I'm already attracting people who already want what to hear what I have to say. And that's really the power of PR. So Claire, thank you so much we could do part 2, 3, 4, and 5 as like AI. I feel like there's so many changes going on with marketing and content, but how can people find you? How can people learn more about you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is on Instagram, and I'm at instagram.com/ClaireWritesCopy. And you can go also to my website, thestorysocial.com.
That's awesome. Thank you for being here, Claire. Until next time.
Thanks for having me.